Okay, great. We're at another pivotal moment in our moving to work, and it's a very exciting one because we're getting ready to actually kick off some implementation. We went down the road, we were successful, and so now we're going to get ready to do some implementation. So I'm going to hopefully, let's see if I can make this work. It's not, yeah. There we go. Okay, click it with the mouse. Okay. First of all, just to kind of remind ourselves of the vision that we created for moving to work when we first started applying for the program is to ensure that low and moderate income individuals in our community, regardless of their economic status, have good choices in where they live and the opportunity to reach their fullest potential. So that's our vision for where we want to go with our moving to work program. Moving to work has 3 statutory goals, and anything that we do under moving to work has to comply with one of these 3 statutory goals. The first is to reduce the cost in administering the federal housing programs, provide incentives for the families to become self-sufficient, and expand housing choice for the families that we serve. So all the activities and everything that we do has to tie back to one of these statutory goals. So here's our year 1. We have a very aggressive year 1. These are all of the activities that we have put into our MTW supplement plan, which is what you have before you to approve tonight. These are the activities that we're going to undertake. The numbers aren't because we don't know sequential numbering, it's because HUD gives us those numbers. So they're not necessarily sequential. They refer back to the different things you can do under MTW. So I'm going to start first with our stepped rents because that's the cohort that we were actually approved under. One of the cohorts that HUD put forth in expanding the MTW program is that they want to be able to look at alternate ways to calculate tenant rent. And we were selected under what's called the stepped rent provision. And so there's certain things that we have to do under that provision of stepped rents. And there's going to be a 6-year study in which HUD will study the way in which these rents are going to be calculated. The purpose of the stepped rents is really to look at different ways to calculate tenant rent, but more importantly, to provide incentives for the families to be able to increase their income without necessarily being penalized by having to pay more rent, which in turn, theoretically should move the families towards self-sufficiency more quicker. It also is intended to reduce the cost to administer the program. There's a lot of administrative burden in these programs right now. And so HUD is looking for ways to make it a little simpler. And as I mentioned, it's going to be under study by HUD. HUD has hired third-party entities that are actually doing a very formal study of this process. And so a lot of the things that we have to do have to comply with statistical sampling and some of the requirements for the study itself. So let me talk about what the stepped rents will do. First of all, what it will do is it will create a rent for the tenants that is not tied to their income. We have always tied rent to income in the housing programs. Everyone has, originally it was 25% of their income. Many years ago, it went to 30% of income. The rent is going to be a fixed amount regardless of what the family's income is, but it will be based on bedroom size. And there will be a temporary hardship available for families that might be experiencing a hardship throughout this process. I'm going to talk more specifically about that. This is an example of how we're going to do the stepped rents. Basically, we're using the current HUD published fair market rents, and then there will be a percentage of increase each year, regardless of what your income is. So for example, somebody living in a 2-bedroom unit will get a rent increase of $36 a year. Regardless of what their income is, they're simply going to increase the tenant portion of the rent by $36 a year. And then it's just for each bedroom size.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
With that example you have there, is all of that expense going to be borne by the family, or is there going to be a certain amount of it that HUD will take care of?
The bottom line where you see the increase per year, that's the dollar amount that the tenant's increase will increase each year.
So the tenant will only pay $36?
No, they'll pay.
That's why
I'm going to show you that in a minute. Their rent will increase by $36. So when they come on the program today, if 30% it's going to start out with the traditional rent calculation. So if their traditional rent calculation, meaning 30% of their monthly adjusted income is $100, they're going to pay $100 for that first year. The second year, if they live in a 2-bedroom, their rent will go to $136, regardless of what their income does. If they live in a 3-bedroom, their rent would go to $150. And I have some more examples that I'll show you in a little bit how that's gonna work.
Okay, so then what you have up there for the 1 bedroom, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's not really what they will be paying.
That will be the increased amount that they will
Right.
pay each year, correct?
No, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about that, for example, maybe I'm not clarifying.
Oh, the top is the fair
Yeah.
market rent.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and
thank
what you see on the second line is 3% of that fair market rent.
Okay.
So it's gonna,
okay,
it's 3%, that's what's driving it.
Okay,
Okay, it could be
Okay.
anywhere between 2 and 4%, and we picked the midpoint of 3%.
okay.
Okay,
Alright.
yeah, and it'll be a little clearer in a few minutes here, okay? Now, there are some households that are excluded from the stepped rent study, okay? Those households include elderly households, that's anyone whose head, co-head, or spouse are 56 years of age or older. It's all the special purpose vouchers, the BASH vouchers, the enhanced vouchers, foster care, emergency housing, all of those are special vouchers and they meet a special need. Any disabled household or a household that's not, or a household that may not be classified right now as disabled, but they've applied for disability or they have an application pending. And any household that's currently at 0 housing assistance payment. There are families that go to 0 right now and they stay on the program for 6 months. So at the time that we launch this, if somebody's at 0, they would be excluded from this because they'll be going off the program shortly thereafter. Okay, so what HUD is going to do then is there's basically going to have 2 groups of people that they study throughout this study process. There's going to be the standard group and there's going to be the study group, and it's going to be randomly selected. So we're going to take all of our families, we're going to take all the people who are exempt that I showed in the previous slide, okay, and then we're going to come up with the group that is not exempt. From that group that is not exempt, HUD is actually going to randomly select those. And some of them are going to be put into the study group and some of them will be put into the standard group. The standard group is going to pay their rent based on the standard rules, the ones we've been using forever. The study group is the group that's going to be paying the stepped rents. So that's basically the way that it'll be done on random selection. So here's an example of how it would really work. Once they're randomly selected, for the first year, their rent will be calculated based on the standard formula. But the second year, their rent will automatically increase. So what I've done is I've shown an example in year 1 through 6. In the first year, if someone has an annual adjusted income of $15,000, under the standard rent formula, 30% of their monthly income, their rent would be $375 before the utility allowance. Under the stepped rent, they're going to pay the same amount the first year. When we get to the second year, say somebody gets their job, they get an increase and their income is now $17,500. Under the standard rent, they would pay $438. But under the stepped rent, this is a 2-bedroom family, so their rent's only going to go up to $30, so they would go to $411. And so this just gives an example. If you go to year 6, if by year 6 somebody now is making $30,000, instead of paying $750 that they would have paid under the standard calculation, under the stepped rent, they're only going to pay $555. So again, the driver behind this is to be able to allow the families to know what their rent is going to be, number 1, and number 2, to go out and secure more income, get better jobs, secure more income, and be able to pay a lower rent amount. And so that's an incentive for self-sufficiency and to provide the families with an incentive to be able to get more income. So that's basically the way it will work, is through that process. Now, what happens when somebody's income goes, well, let me talk a little bit about the additional provisions. There will continue to be a minimum rent at $50. That's what it is now. They will continue to get a utility allowance, and if they receive utility assistance, because their allowance is greater than their rent, they will continue to receive that. But they will go to triennial recertifications, and those recertifications for the people in the stepped rent group will be only for the purposes to determine that they're still eligible. It won't impact the recertification won't be done to determine what their rent is because they're on that step rent. And then if their incomes exceeds 120% of the AMI at the triennial, then they're no longer going to be eligible for the program, but they still get that 6-month window like they do right now when they go to 0 assistance. So if I come in for my triennial recertification, my income's gone above 120%, then I'm no longer eligible for the program, but I have a 6-month window before I actually go off the program. And then interim recertifications will only be done if the owner requests a rent increase or if there's a change in the family size. Otherwise, we don't do interims. They don't have to report an increase in income, and we don't do interim changes. We don't do interims if there's a decrease either. They have to apply for a hardship, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes.
So there's no penalty in that 6 months?
No, there's no penalty. For 6 months, once they reach the 120%, they stay on the program for 6 months. That's just kind of to give them a cushion. If they were to lose their job, they could then come in and ask for a hardship, and then they would continue to be eligible for a longer period of time. So it's kind of a security cushion for the tenants to continue to be able to have some security.
Well, thus far, this seems like this is more favorable for the tenants,
Yeah.
what they're coming out with. And I guess we can also attribute that to Marcia Fudge, who is the secretary of HUD and is also a Delta. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
So if somebody's rent goes down, there are some hardships they can request. They do not automatically get a decrease in rent under this program, okay? But they can request a hardship. And there are basically 3 types of hardships they can get. There's a child care hardship. This is for a family that has child care in excess of $2,500 per year. The child care costs are deducted from their gross income, and the rent would be recalculated at the beginning of their step. But they're only allowed to request that hardship twice throughout the 6-year period. So they can't request it all the time. It's a twice as all they get in the 6-year period, okay? The second hardship they can request is what's called a high rent burden hardship. This is if the step rent becomes more than 40% of their income. The tenant must come in and they must request that hardship. It's not automatic. It has to be requested and it has to be in writing. It is a temporary hardship that does not exceed 90 days. And at the end of that period, they must reapply. But then we have something called a sustained hardship. This is if somebody has a hardship condition that continues for 12 consecutive months. At that point, the review committee, there's going to be a hardship review committee that's required. It will determine on a case-by-case basis if their step rent will be reset. So let's say they're on step 5, they're in year 5 and they've reached step 5. They may get set back to step 2 or step 3 to decrease their rent if they have a sustained hardship. And it'll be a committee that evaluates this of the staff and makes those determinations. Basically, their new step rent would be set at TTP. It would be the higher of the minimum rent or 30% of their prior year adjusted income. And then that would apply for 12 months and they get a new basis for their step, depending on where they are at that point in time. So these are the 3 hardships that somebody can apply for. But the intent, again, is to let the families know how much their rent is going to be, and it remains constant. The families don't have to guess how much is my rent going to be. They're going to know if my rent's $100, next year it's going to be $130, the next year it's going to be $160. They're going to know in advance how much their rent's going to be. So it's really going to be very helpful to the families because they can plan better. They know what their rent's going to be, and they're going to have an opportunity to go out and earn income and not have to pay more rent, which is going to really help them. Yes, sir.
So with, let's say COVID or monkeypox, if
Yeah.
it goes where it's looking, I'm just saying, would that be a sustained hardship?
It could be. It depends on what the circumstances are. HUD would, something of that nature, the federal government would give us guidance on whether it is. But a sustained hardship would be somebody who got injured on the job and they can't work for a period of time. And their workers' comp is much less than what they might have been making in wages. And they know they're not going to be able to go back to work for 12 months. Okay, that would be more of the type of sustained hardship where they had a major operation. Most of it would be medical types of reasons more than anything, more than likely, barring a natural disaster or another pandemic or something of that sort. So that would be a sustained hardship. So, okay, any questions on the stepped rent? That's kind of a high level overview of what the stepped rent is going to look like. Let's talk about our other activities that we're going to be doing this year under MTW then. An alternate utility allowance. This is basically gets back to more cost-effective operations of the program. Right now, we have multiple utility allowances. If I live in an apartment or a duplex or a single-family home or a mobile home or whatever I live in, I have a different utility allowance. The alternate schedule is going to allow us to have a single utility allowance based on your bedroom size. Again, this will be much easier for the landlords and the tenants to understand and know how much that utility allowance is. The payment standards, we're very excited about this one. You know, rents have gone up all over the country astronomically, I mean, significantly. And our voucher holders are having a real hard time finding places to rent because the payment standards have not kept up with the pace of the rents. So under moving to work, we will be able to go up to 150% of the small area fair market rents. And in fact, we will be creating our own primary market areas. We'll have a market analyst who's going to come in and work with the authority and determine within the city of Portsmouth how many market areas really are there with different rents. And we'll establish payment standards based on the real estate market and not some random number that HUD comes with out of the, yes, Ed?
Let them know that right now we're going to go up to 110.
110% is all you can go to right now. So this is a significant advantage that should hopefully help our families quite a bit. Rent reasonableness, this is something that we have to do to determine that the rents are in fact reasonable. And right now we cannot do rent reasonableness if we happen to own the property. Under MTW, we'll be able to do that. So this will give us an opportunity to do that. The alternate recertification schedule, I touched on that. The folks that are in the rent study, the stepped rent, they will automatically be triennial, but we're also going to go to triennial for all of our families, regardless. We will go to triennial recertifications. Again, that will reduce workload on staff. Self-certification of assets. Right now, the staff spends so much time collecting bank accounts that have $5 or $10 or $20 in them. Under MTW, we will get rid of all of that, and we will not have to verify any assets unless they're 50,000 or more. Anything under that will be the family filling out a certification that says, I don't have any assets that are greater than $50,000. And so again, that will save an incredible amount of staff time and on the families as well, instead of having to chase down all their bank statements for the last 3 months. So HQS inspections. We're going to, oh, I'm sorry, I missed the landlord incentives. Landlord incentives, very important. We are allowed to provide incentives to landlords. So we've elected to say that we're going to provide an incentive for any landlord that's not currently participating in the voucher program. We will give him a 1-month bonus if he signs a HAP contract. So he'll get 2 months payment that first month instead of just one, based on, he'll get up to 1 full month rent as a bonus to sign on. Again, that's a way to try to get landlords who may not want to participate in the voucher program excited and wanting to participate in it. HQS inspections, we will be able to conduct inspections on our own properties now, as long as we have a supervisor that does some quality control. And we're going to go to triennial inspections as well. So we'll do inspections every 3 years, which also will be kind of an advantage and a cost-saving measure. Project-based voucher program. This is very important on our development programs in particular, because we use project-based vouchers to help develop new housing. We'll be able to increase our program cap to 50%. Right now, that's limited to 20%. Under moving to work, we will go up to 50%. Our project cap, how many project-based vouchers we can put in a single property. Right now, we can only do 100% if the housing is elderly or disabled, or we have some kind of special services. Under moving to work, we'll be able to go up to 100% in any project if we choose to do so. We eliminate any type of a selection process. If we own the properties, we can just basically give project-based vouchers to ourselves under MTW. And we will limit choice mobility to 24 months. Right now, it's a 12-month. That means somebody living in a project-based voucher property, at the end of 12 months, they can request a tenant-based voucher. We're going to extend that to 24 months. It gives a little bit more stability to those project-based properties, particularly the ones that we own, if families stay there for 2 years before they go on and request a move. Our FSS program, we're going to switch that up a little bit, and we're going to call it, in our original application, we referred to it as our Family Independence Initiative. It basically will replace the traditional FSS program. For those families that are currently on the FSS, they will be able to choose to stay with the current FSS program or move to the new MTW Independence Initiative. What this program will do is, rather than calculating an escrow based on changes in their earned income, it will actually pay them a specific amount for goals that are accomplished. So there'll be a schedule that says if you get your GED, you get X number of dollars. If you get an associate's degree, you get X number of dollars. So it will drive their goal accomplishment versus just driving their income. And so it'll be geared much more towards that. They will get paid out their escrow as they do now. It'll be upon graduation. And we've defined in our supplement that graduation will be 6 months of consecutive employment, and the family's no longer receiving any type of TANF payments. So that's what graduation will be. And so that'll be a little bit of change in our FSS program. Development program, this is very exciting. We can use up to 10% of our voucher money. One of the big things about MTW, you know, for years we've been told you can't commingle funds, you can't commingle funds. Well, now we're in MTW and we get to commingle all our funds. So all of our funds go into what's called an MTW block grant, our Section 8 money, our public housing money, our capital funds. Any of our HUD money basically goes into a block grant. We're able to use up to 10% of our housing choice voucher budget to do development activities for secondary financing. So that's really going to help us with some of our development projects as well. And then finally, another activity is the alternate verification hierarchy. Right now, HUD has like 6 different steps that you have to follow to verify somebody's income. We're going to simplify that. We're going to use HUD's EIV system, which we're required to use. Then we're going to use either a written or an oral third party, and then we're going to allow tenants to self-certify to their income. Just again, to kind of simplify it both for the clients as well as for the housing authority to be able to administer these programs. And finally, our home ownership program. We're looking at doing an MTW home ownership program instead of the traditional Section 8 home ownership program. This will basically provide a secondary form of financing or a soft mortgage, which will allow the family to qualify for a mortgage at a lesser amount than what the house cost. And we will bring in a second mortgage for these amounts based on the income of the family. And that will be forgiven at 10% a year. So if they live in the house for 10 years, it'll be fully forgiven and they'll be able to accumulate equity by purchasing a home. So that's another thing that we're going to do under MTW. Yes.
AMI is.
Area median income. So if they're between 50 and 70%, they have to be at least 50% to be eligible because they've got to qualify for a mortgage still, some form of a first mortgage. And then we'll provide up to $40,000 to help assist them with purchasing that home. Other questions? Yeah, did you have a comment, Ed?
And the good thing about doing that is because if you were to take a 15-year mortgage and then let's say the other half was $500, which is $6,000 a year, 15 years, we would have paid $90,000. This way, we're saving the agency $50 grand.
Right.
And we can use that to help other families.
Exactly. All right. So along with MTW, we're going to talk about our remaining real estate portfolio that is in the public housing program. So this is what we still have left in the public housing program today. We have the 3 Westbury properties, Holly, Pine, and Cottages, and we have Seaboard 1 and 2 that are still sitting in the public housing portfolio. So part of moving to work will be taking those properties out of the public housing portfolio. The advantage that we have as an MTW agency, we have these tools that HUD has given us, but we can couple our MTW initiatives on top of the tools that HUD has given us, and it's going to make it a little easier for us to be able to remove these properties from public housing. Why do we want to remove them from public housing? Because HUD has not funded the public housing program at 100% of its eligibility for many, many, many years. It's probably been well over 20 years. Where on an annual basis, Congress appropriates money to fully fund the Section 8 programs, but they do not fully fund the public housing program. And so that's one of the main reasons. And the second main reason is that public housing is always funded at a much lower level per unit. So you simply don't have the money to maintain or create reserves for public housing. The program was never designed to think about replacement reserves. And so you just don't know from year to year what kind of money you even have to manage these properties. So we're going to move them out of public housing and move them to a Section 8 platform. We're going to do that using some tools. This is kind of what I call the HUD toolbox. HUD is really encouraging housing authorities to get out of the public housing program because they know that it's not being funded at a level that can sustain it. And so they've given us this box of tools. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is RAD, because that's the big tool that HUD is really pushing and wants everybody to use. RAD actually started back in 2012. It's a demonstration program, but it has continued to grow. And when it first started, it was kind of hard to do because the rents are much lower in RAD than they are when you go to the Section 8 platform. They've done some things that have made it a little bit more creative today. This is a little bit about RAD. It was created to give us a tool to preserve and improve public housing and address the multi-billion-dollar backlog across the country of deferred maintenance. So this just kind of shows you what's happened in RAD since the beginning of time. There's been over 1 million public housing. There's 1 million public housing units nationwide. As of last year, about 157 of them had converted to RAD already, and about another 180,000 were in the process. So about 34% of the public housing across the country has already or is in the process of converting to RAD. What RAD actually does is it allows us to go out and leverage private debt and equity. Right now, if we needed to fix up a public housing property, we could not go out and borrow any money. We couldn't do tax credits. We couldn't put any kind of debt. Public housing statutorily is prohibited from having any debt put on it. So by taking those public housing units out of the public housing program and moving them to the Section 8 platform, we can now go out and secure private equity and debt. And so that's what HUD wants us to do. They want us to go out into the private market and get private capital to maintain these properties in the future. So that's the main thing that RAD does. It moves it to the Section 8 platform with long-term contracts, so it still protects the asset to assure that it's going to continue to be affordable. It's basically the Section 8 contracts are perpetual. There's a RAD use agreement that requires you to renew the contract. It's for 20 years, and then it renews for 20 years every time thereafter. The residents benefit because if you're going to redevelop a property under RAD, number one, it's a one-for-one replacement, so you can't lose any units. And number two, the tenants have a guaranteed right to a unit in the project without being rescreened. So it protects the tenants throughout the process as well. They continue to pay 30% of their income. It maintains the public stewardship because the property have a controlling interest either by a public body or a nonprofit entity. So it makes sure that they continue to do that. And basically what it does is it's more cost effective because it shifts the public housing to the Section 8 platform. And as I just mentioned, historically, Congress has always funded the Section 8 programs at a much higher level than what they fund public housing as. So that's the purpose of RAD and some of the benefits of it. The downside of RAD is that it didn't come with any new money. It came with the existing money. And so one of the challenges with RAD has been that the rents are lower than what they would be if you had just a straight Section 8 rent. Because what HUD did is they took the public housing money, which right now in public housing, the tenant pays a rent, we get operating funds from HUD, and we get capital funds. We don't know how much those operating funds and capital funds are each year because they're based solely on congressional appropriations. And as I mentioned, Congress tends to appropriate less money in the public housing. But what happens is whatever we got for public housing converts over to Section 8 and it becomes the Section 8 rent for that property. So you still have the tenant rent, but then the operating and capital funds become the money that's available for the housing assistance payment. So the rents tend to be a little bit lower because it's based on public housing funding. And so HUD looked at that and they said, okay, there's a lot of people that can't do RAD because the rents are too low to support the amount of debt that's needed to rehab the property or to replace the property. So now they've come up with some other tools that they've given us that help us deal with some of that. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Section 18. Y'all are somewhat familiar with Section 18 because Swanson Homes, we used Section 18 obsolescence to be able to get that out of the public housing inventory. So you all have done some Section 18 in the past. So Section 8 disposition you can do for multiple reasons now. In the past, you could only do it for obsolescence, and that's what we used for Swanson Homes. But now they've expanded Section 18 and they're letting you use it for other things. So you could go in and say, I can operate this property much more effectively and efficiently if I convert it to a Section 8 platform. Because as public housing, I don't have enough money to operate it and take care of the repairs. If I operate it as project-based vouchers, I'm going to generate more revenue. I can support some debt to fix it up, and I'm going to be able to maintain the property better. So when we do that, we basically submit a Section 18 application to the SAC. And we basically we receive tenant protection vouchers, new vouchers from HUD. We don't use our existing, HUD gives us new vouchers. And then the tenants have the option of taking that voucher and moving elsewhere or staying on the property because we're going to put project-based vouchers on those properties. But we've now increased the revenue by about probably 60% on that property. In public housing, we might have been getting $700. When we get that project-based voucher, we're probably getting closer to $1,400 or $1,500. We actually increased it probably 50%. 60%. So what we're looking at right now is Westbury Holly and Westbury Pine. We're looking at taking those properties into HUD under a Section 18 more effective and more efficient. That would be our MTW goal because we'll be able to do two things. We'll be able to go in and get it out of the public housing program, determine if we want to put any debt on it, but then we'll also be able to use MTW funds to support it. Even though, because we're MTW, once you take these out of public housing without being MTW, you have no other funds that you can use because they become private. But we'll be able to continue to use MTW block grant funds to support the properties if we need to do that. So we're looking at wanting to put those in basically Section 18 disposition. The next thing I want to talk about then is voluntary conversion because it's really the easy one. When you get down to less than 250 units, you can just go into HUD and say, you know what? I want to get out of this public housing program and I just want to convert these units. No reason, no nothing. You just say you want to do it. So we're looking at taking Seaboard 1 and 2 and Westbury Cottages, because it gets us under the 250 units, and being able to go in under what HUD calls a streamlined voluntary conversion. When we do that, we tell them we're going to exit the public housing program. It has a very simplified process that we have to go into HUD. The same thing happens. We get tenant protection vouchers, and we put project-based vouchers at the property. We've now increased the revenue on those properties by 50, 60%. And that's what we do. So that's really, as we've analyzed the remaining of our portfolio and we've moved to MTW, that's really what we're looking at wanting to do with the remaining properties so that we can exit the public housing program. Our goal is to make this happen by the end of this year. And so that's pretty aggressive, but we're going to work on it and see if we can make that happen. So that's kind of where we are with our real estate portfolio. And that's it. I've talked enough. I'll try not to keep it longer.
Thank you.
Commissioners, that's like drinking from fire.